So even though I can't empower more youth to come to COP because not everyone has that ability, I'm still here spreading my voice as a youth, saying that our voices matter. This is our future that you're talking about, making decisions on what you're going to do with our future when we become the next voters, when we become the next people that are going to attend these meetings and make the next decisions. That's what we're considering. And that's why I'm here and hoping to get more youth voices heard at COP.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. It's a very important topic that we'll be addressing. That is climate education, the empowerment of youth. We need youth to be empowered. One of the SDG goals, Sustainable Development Goals, that is Sustainable Development Goal number 4, deals with the importance of education and equity in education around the world. And then there's 4.7, and that deals specifically with climate education. And this needs to be integrated heavily into the educational process. We all know that the last 2.5 years brought a tremendous amount of upset and disruption to education throughout the world. So we need to revamp that. And with that, we need to include climate education because it's not separate. Climate education is not a separate subject. Whether you're studying math, whether you're studying psychology, whether you're studying history, the ancient Romans knew how to work with the environment and build structures so as to use the natural environment to do things such as cool the people in the stadiums, things of this nature. We can learn from every subject how to improve our warming society. And we have some very special guests here today to help us understand what we can teach youth of the world so that they can be empowered. So I'd like to give a brief overview of our guests. First, to my left is Kathy Orlando. And Kathy Orlando works as the program director at the Citizens Climate International, or Citizens Climate International, where with her team, she directs programs that support volunteers in over 75 countries to build political will for a climate-safe future. And to her left is Sophia Mather, I hope I pronounced that correctly, who began environmental lobbying at the old age of 7. And she has made her way through the US Congress and Canadian Parliament with Citizens Climate Lobby. Emulating Greta Thunberg's activism, she was the first youth outside Europe to do Fridays for Future, with their first action being in 2018, I believe. We could all learn a lot from her. To her left is Dr. Deb Morrison, who's a climate and anti-oppression activist, scientist, learning scientist, educator, mother, and locally elected official, to name a few. She is a published author on diverse topics, including climate justice learning, and works to foster collaborative writing partnerships across disciplines and communities. And last but not least is Paul Beckwith, who is a climate scientist educator, and he is also an educator professionally, and he is a known personality, shall we say, on YouTube with his very own climate YouTube channel. So I'm very excited to hear what we'll learn today from our guests on the panel. And I will start with you, Kathy.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. So yes, I work with volunteers in over 75 countries around the world, and including Canada. And two big pieces missing in education are the financial understanding of how to deal with the climate crisis, and also helping politicians understand that. Okay. So a lot of the focus of the work I do is teaching everyday citizens how to talk about climate finance. So there are 5 buckets of which you can train people to work in climate finance. The first one is carbon pricing. So you can teach them about the different ways you can price carbon pollution, cap and trade, carbon taxes, or our favorite climate policy, which is called climate income or carbon fee and dividend, where you put an incrementally rising price on carbon pollution and give the money back to the people. So that's one bucket. Another bucket is border carbon adjustment mechanisms. So getting people in tune with the understanding that in order to ultimately have a global carbon pricing policy, the World Trade Organization is going to have to develop mechanisms for that to happen, and those will be called border carbon adjustment mechanisms. A third bucket is financial institutions. So creating regulations for your own country's financial institutions to disclose climate risks. So investors will know whether or not to invest in that company. I know this is a lot. So carbon pricing, border carbon adjustment mechanisms, finances. And then there's two more. One is subsidies. And we often talk about fossil fuel subsidies, but there are all sorts of ways our governments are funding the destruction of this planet, whether it be in fisheries or mining or agriculture. So train people to talk about those subsidies, which are about $1.5 trillion a year. And then the last bucket is the World Trade Organization, the IMF, the multilateral development banks, and the Bretton Woods systems. So helping those institutions transform so we can get the money back to where it belongs. So I come to these COPs, and just two brief stories. Last year, I was in a session with the economists that are helping the finance ministers around the world. And one of the economists said that climate change, like the way that we respond to it, will not be linear. So once we get all these tracks laid down with carbon pricing, border carbon adjustments, finance mechanisms, subsidies, and the World Trade Organization, we're going to start seeing money flow in the right direction. So my last message to you is follow the money. We can totally recover from COVID, finance loss and damage, finance successful adaptation, and finance mitigation, and get off fossil fuels. That is 100% possible. All we need to do is follow the money. So that's my goal, is to just keep giving people the climate financial literacy. And I'm going to leave it at that. And that's good. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kathy. That's something that is truly important, the fact that we're financing our own destruction. And it's really such wise advice, follow the money, because there is enough money to do what we need to do to save our lives, our world, our planet. So now I'd like to turn it over to Sophia, and would love to hear some of your experience and your thoughts on the topic.
Yes. Okay. I'm hoping everyone can hear me. Hi, my name's Sophia, and I'm only 15 years old. Since I started my activism, one of my main goals has always been to empower more youth to get involved. So my activism started very much from the very beginning of my life. I always grew up in a family that talked about climate change at the dinner table. We discussed solutions and such, but I kind of saw it more as kind of a dinner table discussion, or the job of my mom. But when I grew up, and I was around 7 years old, it was around the time that my mom was to go lobbying, and my dad would usually take me to a museum of art or something, and we'd go have a fun day. I decided, you know what, I want to see what my mom's job is all about. So I got to spend the day tagging along with my mom in politicians' rooms and listening to her talk about all the effects of climate change and everything that was going to happen to my future. And I think that was my moment of realization that, wow, this isn't just my mom's job. This isn't just a dinner table discussion. This is something that is going to affect me, my future, and the future of so many youth around the world. So that's when I started to get involved. I started, well, at that age, since I was only 7, I was drawing photos for politicians and giving them to them as kind of presents and messages, basically saying to protect my future. But as I got older, I started to realize, I need to do something on myself. I need to do something that was to empower more youth and educate more youth about how this was affecting their future. And that's when I heard about Greta Thunberg and her activism with Fridays for Future, and I decided to get involved with that. And not only did I empower myself to get more youth involved, I empowered my friends, people in my school to do as such. So even though I can't empower more youth to come to COP because not everyone has that ability, I'm still here spreading my voice as a youth, saying that our voices matter. This is our future that you're talking about, making decisions on what you're going to do with our future when we become the next voters, when we become the next people that are going to attend these meetings and make the next decisions. That's what we're considering, and that's why I'm here and hoping to get more youth voices heard at COP.
Well, Sophia, I would say that you are off to a very good start. And at 15, you've done more than most people will probably ever do in their lives. So on behalf of everyone here, I definitely would like to thank you. And I think it's so important for young people to see other young people getting involved, because just as you were inspired by Greta, others will be inspired by you. And that is a powerful thing, just to be a model of change by doing what you're doing. So what you're doing is really, really amazing. Thank you so much. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Morrison to share her experience on the topic.
Thank you so much. There's so many things that we need to think about when we think about what effective climate change education is and about how to get it in place. So maybe I'll touch on a couple of those key points. First of all, climate change education is not contained within the school walls. We no longer have the luxury of having a type of education that is passive learning, but instead it needs to be action-centered, solution-centered, and community-based. And that type of education needs to be created in and with community. So we can't take off-the-shelf curriculum and just assume that it's going to land in every community in an effective way. We can use resources, we can take common resources and we can adapt them into local ways, local places, but we do need to contextualize for local content, local places. To do that, we actually have an enormous system in the middle that we need support for. So we need support for educators, for their principals, for communities and families, and we need to think about how to pull all those knowledges together into the education that youth are the center of. Youth being the center of that education does not mean that they're the only learner. Everyone in that type of community-centered contextualized learning is learning. And that's what we need right now. We need all of society learning that is community-centered. Schools can be that kind of central place, but we need to be able to support them. Okay, so let's step out now one level. How do we support them? So there are unfortunately very few examples of how systemic science education has been done. I've been co-leading the Washington State Climatime Project for the last 5 years, and it is a legislatively funded state effort that actually supports educators, brings community-based organizations, tribal nations, government agencies all together to learn and think and support educators and then deliver climate change education in schools across the state. So that's one just tip of the iceberg example. It's climatime.org is a helpful resource to look at that. I'd also like to mention things like the Office of Climate Education in Paris. They're doing an excellent job of translating the IPCC materials, the really great, like meaty, weighty technical data into resources that can be used in classrooms. And so those types of resources are starting to be written into pedagogically sound curriculum that are then adapted into different locations around the world. We do not lack resources right now. We lack will to be able to have systemic implementation, because to train all those teachers, to train all those administrators, to bring communities into conversation with each other, that takes funding. back to the funding conversation. So we need to ensure that we are funding the connective tissue of systemic education efforts. Two other quick things I'll mention. I know that the OER project is now producing something called the OER Climate Project, which is a social studies directed curriculum. Also, really great adaptive and civics focused climate education. The Office of Climate Education's curriculum is more science focused. So the combination of those two could be quite rich. And then finally, there is a number of efforts across the United States. The STEM Teaching Tools Collection now has a portal of resources for climate learning, and the Climate Literacy and Energy Awareness Network has an incredible depth of highly valuable scientist and teacher vetted resources. All of these things are very valuable resources to be working and thinking with. But again, what we really are lacking to be able to see systemic implementation is state level or structural systemic level funding to help implement sustain professional learning in these areas. Thanks very much. And boy, we're seeing a huge increase in this area. I'm really happy to see it. 20 years working in this space, and the last 5 has been just like, thank you. So thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. I think they're very important, and they brought to mind some things. If a bomber fell out of the sky right now in the United States, let's say it cost a few $1 trillion, there would be another bomber right behind it, and there would be the funds to replace it. But in terms of money to get books in school, that funding doesn't exist. And I really like your question, what is effective climate education? And I do want to mention that in my own experience in my childhood in California, before Proposition 13 was enacted, limiting funding to schools, every 6th grade child in California, at least where I was, went to something called 6th grade camp. So what this was a sleepaway camp where 6th graders all went, whether they could afford it or not. And we slept in the woods. We had daily programs, learning about the understory, learning about ground cover, learning about the fish in the streams. We learned about trapdoor spiders. We learned about the interconnectedness of nature. And this was a very important part of my education. It is something I will always remember and always cherish. Unfortunately, this program no longer exists. Why is that? Another thing that I want to bring up is I'm from New York City, and one of the programs that New York City has, there's an organization called the Billion Oyster Project. And many of you may know that oysters, they're filter fish, right? Bivalves. They clean the water. The Billion Oyster Project is working to create oyster reefs in New York Harbor to clean the water of New York Harbor. And with that, they have the New York Harbor School, which is a school for grades 9 through 12. And these students learn various things about marine life. They learn about scuba diving. They learn about protecting the environment. And they also learn trades. There's many different paths they can pursue once they're in this educational program. But the point is they are also helping to restore New York Harbor. It's integrated into their education. Also, the Fashion Institute of Technology has a program on fighting fast fashion. So it's very important that from fashion to environmental studies in terms of like marine ecology, every aspect of education needs to be infused. At Columbia Business School, there is a whole department with environmental education with an MBA that a student can pursue. So we need to get creative about what climate education looks like so that the youth can do what they need to do to make this world livable. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Paul Beckwith, who is a climate scientist and educator, as I mentioned, on YouTube. So Paul?
Yes, thank you. And thank you to everybody for attending. So I've been involved in education for many, many years, everything from teaching 5-year-olds how to play chess to teaching first, second, third-year university students courses in climatology, meteorology, oceanography, geographical methods, physical geography. people cannot have too much education on the climate system. But what we need to do, well, first of all, kids that graduate from high school today have next to nothing on climate education, next to nothing, literally, and that's in many places. We need to incorporate the climate idea, the climate lens in psychology, philosophy, biology, the sciences, of course, but we need to also to get to the engineers. I mean, the engineers are ones who are looking at solutions, whether it be civil engineering, what size diameter pipes do you need in your city now to withstand torrential rains that flood out your city? How strong does the power grid have to be? Does it still make sense to have power lines strung over streets, or does it make more sense to bury them under the ground? How do we make structures that we build, our houses, et cetera, more resistant? So one example in Canada is Ontario is trying to change the building codes so that there's strapping holding the roof on more strongly. So if there's a small size tornado, EF 1, 2, or 0, you don't lose your roof. And then if you don't lose your roof, then you don't lose your entire structure. So we need to change the way that people are educated. And I really strongly advocate for that with engineers. The focus of my work at the moment is I have my video channel, and I do a lot of climate emergency forum videos weekly, and I give talks various places, et cetera, trying to reach as many people as possible, focusing a lot on social media to get the message out. So what I do is I look at the most important, and I know that they're most important because based on my experience, but the most important climate papers, the peer-reviewed scientific papers that come out, and I go through them in great detail until I understand them, and then I try to do a video on them to educate the public, the layperson, if you like, what the findings are in this latest science. So I try to do all that, no acronyms, no complicated terms. I try to put everything sort of in a straightforward manner to let the public keep up with the latest science. And then I try to fit that into the bigger picture of how the overall climate system is changing, how the changes are accelerating. And that allows me and other people that follow the videos to my YouTube channel to kind of get a feeling for where we're heading. How long will it be before we lose Arctic sea ice? How long will it be before Greenland and Antarctic glacier melt rapidly ramps up, so sea level spikes up? How safe your place is where you live? What is the risk of you having extreme weather events that you've never had before? So it gives you a clear picture of how the climate is changing, and that's very important for many different reasons. Now, Regina was saying that we are financing our own destruction, and I couldn't agree more with that statement. It's not like we're doing nothing on climate change. It's like we're doing everything possible in the wrong fashion to make climate change worse. We're shooting ourselves in the foot multiple times. If an alien species was looking down at us from deep space, they probably have vetting parlors, and they're saying, well, how long will it be before this so-called intelligent species accelerates themselves to planetary destruction? What's the over-under? Is it 10 years, 20 years? Or, will they actually change their behaviors and, step back from the brink? And that's an open question right now. So
Thank you so much, Paul. I agree it's an open question. It's scary that it's an open question. We have so much potential as a species, and yet, as you say, we use it to our own destruction. Yeah, it's really sad. And all I can say is it all begins in the mind, the will to do something differently, and the will to nurture the children of the world and to treat them as if we care, because that's what it all comes down to. I want to thank everyone for being here today. I also want to thank Sustainable Population Australia for allowing us to be here to speak with you. I want to encourage all of the educators out there, all of the students, to continue, fight the good fight. We're there with you. and we support you in every way that we can. So thank you so much.